Hello again peeps. So today we're going to step things up to the next level. Up to now my videos have been aimed at the complete beginner, but now we're going to look at some more advanced things. Today we're going to look at slow flight. I originally planned to do stalls as well in this video, however after doing some research on the manoeuvres I think it would be best for that to have its own video, so that will be next in the series. So slow flight is where we take the plane from a cruise all the way down to a very low speed where the plane is barely flying. The reason we need to learn about slow flight is so we can prepare for stalls and learn to control the plane at slow speed, which we might encounter during takeoff or landing. First, a couple of things we need to be wary of. Slow flight takes quite a bit of coordination when you first try it. We'll be flying in an unfamiliar way and making constant changes to throttle, pitch, flaps and rudder inputs, whilst keeping a close eye on speed, altitude and heading. So there's a lot happening and you need to be in control at all times. You may struggle or find this difficult, which is completely normal. I'm gonna be honest, it took me a good number of hours before I felt confident enough to record this video. Secondly, when flying slowly, the plane will be pitched up quite a lot. The nose will be pointing quite high, more than you're used to when climbing off to takeoff for example. This causes an aerodynamic effect on the plane called P factor or propeller factor. I won't go into the details of how it works, but when the plane is pitched up at a large angle, one side of the propeller is generating more force than the other. What this does is cause the plane to turn to the left. The important thing that you need to know is that you need to constantly hold the rudder to the right to prevent the plane from turning. So before we jump into the plane, let's have a look at a list of actions we'll be taking. Think of this as a slow flight checklist. Before we start slow flight, we'll be flying straight and level. The first step will be to reduce the power to 1500 RPM. What will happen is the nose will begin to fall, so we need to pull back on the controls to hold our altitude steady. The second step is to extend the flaps incrementally. So what that means is from going from 0 flaps down to 10 degrees. Let the speed bleed off a little bit and then extend the flaps from 10 to 20 degrees. Let the speed bleed off a little bit more and then extend the flaps all the way down to 30. The third step is to slow to about 50 knots, that's kind of our target speed. When we get down to about that speed, what you want to do is you want to increase the throttle to maintain our altitude. So when we're flying in slow flight, we kind of control our altitude by using the throttle, and we control our speed by using the pitch. So that's lifting the nose up and dropping it down. It'll only be very small movements when we do it though. And step 4, as I explained a moment ago, is you need to use the right rudder to control the plane's heading. When you increase the throttle again, that's when you'll really start to notice the plane try to veer to the left. So you need to be ready on the right rudder to control that. So our checklist has a sort of a second half to it, and that's our recovery from slow flight. So that's how we go from slow flight back into a cruise. So the first step will be to increase the power to full. When we do this, the plane will want to try and start climbing, so we'll need to lower the nose to make sure that we maintain our altitude. The second step is to retract the flaps incrementally. So that's basically reverse of what we did before. So we'll go from 30 degrees of flaps to 20, let the speed build up a bit, and then go from 20 to 10, let the speed build up some more, and then bring the flaps all the way up to 0. And then the third step is to accelerate back up to our cruise speed, which will be about 90 to 100 knots. Once we reach that speed, we'll just bring the throttle back slightly and then trim the plane for straight and level flight. So let's jump into a plane and see slow flight in action. Okay, so here we are flying around at about 3,000 feet. What I'd recommend doing is for the first couple of times you try this would be to stick to cardinal headings. So that's basically north, south, east or west. I find it's easier to use those rather than try to stick to a specific heading. So, slow flight. Let's reduce the throttle to 1500 RPM. And you see the nose starts to drop. So, we'll just pull back on the stick. And if you look at the speed now, that starts to drop off as well. So, put in 10 degrees of flaps. Keep pulling back on the stick to hold our altitude. 20 degrees of flaps. And 30 degrees of flaps. Now put in a bunch of power. And you see the plane tries to pull to the left there, so that's why we need that right rudder. try and settle that down there. Now, so we're about 60 knots. So all we're going to do is just keep easing the stick backs gently. Just keep lifting the nose, which will bring our speed down. So just keep holding it back. See, we're up at about 55 knots now. So just very gently bringing it back. It's just like landing, you just keep holding it until the speed drops off. If you look at our altitude and our heading, we're still pointing east, we're still at around 3,000 feet, and now our speed's come down to about 50 knots, which is where we want. So now we are in slow flight. Once just control the rudder input there, and we are pretty much stable at 50 knots. Just over 3,000 feet, and we're still pointing east. So to get out of it, full throttle, and if you watch the vertical speed, you'll see we'll start to climb. So we just drop the nose to 1 to control our altitude, and 2 to help us gain some speed, which we have. So flaps up to 20. Let the speed pick up a bit more. Flaps up to 10. Keep dropping the nose as the speed picks up, so we don't gain too much altitude, and flaps up all the way. And then we'll just let the speed pick up to about 90 knots, and then we'll just power slightly, and then what we'll do is we'll try and get ourselves settled into a cruise here. So we'll just trim the plane out there. And we're now in a cruise. So yeah, we're up at about 95 knots, we're still pointing east, and our altitude is now 3,100 feet, which isn't too bad. I think when you do an official exam, your altitude is not allowed to sort of fluctuate between 100 feet of your starting altitude. So we're just above 100, so we're about 120, 140 feet above 3,000 now, so not a big problem, but that's just something to be aware of. I think that's testing real world exams. Also for your heading, I think you're not allowed to go 10 degrees left or right of your starting heading as well, and I think we just about managed to control that during the slow flight, so that was a decent example, I'm surprised to say. So what we'll do is we'll try it again, just as a second example. So reduce the engine down to 1500 RPM, pick the nose up, okay, 10 degrees of flaps, 20 degrees of flaps, 30 degrees of flaps, and then just as the speed gets past about 60 knots, put some power back in, right rudder to control it, okay. So now at about 60 knots, so we'll just keep easing the stick back to try and bring that speed down a little bit further. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to show you what happens, because there is a good chance if you're trying this for the first time that you might stall the plane. So I'll show you what happens, or how to get out of a stall quickly. I will cover it in more detail in my next video, but I'll show you it just now. So we're losing our heading slightly, so we'll just keep bringing the nose up and putting a bit more right rudder to try and get us back on to heading. There we go. So we're at 50 knots now. So what I'm going to do is just going to keep pulling back on stick and force this plane into a stall. And to recover from stall, all you do is you just push the nose down, full throttle, and then pull the nose back up slowly. So there we go. So nose down, full throttle, and then bring it back up. So just in case that happens to you, what we'll do is we'll just continue out of slow flight now. So flaps up again. So you see we lost our heading slightly and our altitude a little bit there. what we'll do is we'll just use this as an example to recover to a cruise. So flaps are all the way up now, and then we'll just let the nose fall so we pick up speed a bit better. 90 knots, so reduce the throttle slightly, and then we'll get this trimmed out. So there you go. So that was slow flight. You know, you can do the maneuver quite quickly. Once you've tried it a few times, it isn't as bad as you think it is. You know, once you've tried it a few times, you kind of get a feel for it and are able to do it quite quickly. So that's all there is to it. As I said, my next video will be looking at stalls in more detail, what causes them, and more importantly, how to recover from them. Thanks again for watching. As always, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask them or make any comments. You know, I will answer them and I will help you out as best as I can. So thanks again, and I'll catch you later.